All right, hey everyone, I'm Kevin Owocki. I am one of the founders of Gitcoin, and I am here to talk about Sybil resistance, which is basically how do we get to more one human, one vote systems. And hopefully that enables an ecosystem of more democratic DAOs. So one token, one vote systems are plutocratic, one human, one vote systems are really great for the everyday citizen across the world who may not have a ton of capital, but might benefit from the things that Web3 has to offer. So we are going to talk about three things during this talk. Sybil resistance is an important problem to address. I'll talk about my experience at Gitcoin with Sybil resistance, and then also external, what I see as the opportunities within Sybil resistance within the ecosystem. We'll characterize the infinite Sybil resistant game, and then we'll talk about a Sybil resistant money Lego from there. So has anyone in the audience used Gitcoin grants? All right. I was just looking for a pulse check, but thanks for the woo, Willie. That makes me feel good. So quick recap of Gitcoin grants and how it works. It is a matching campaign that matches contributions from the crowd, but there is a hitch. If two grants raise the same amount of money and one of them has way more contributors, then they get more of the matching pool. So as opposed to a one-to-one matching where if two grants raise the same amount of money, then they get the same amount of money, we're actually optimizing for the preferences of the poor and the many with quadratic funding. Quadratic funding is not my idea. Glenn Weil, Vitalik Buterin, and Zoe Hitzig came up with that. I feel like I inherited this like perfect crystal alien technology, and I'm the one who's trying to bring it to the world with quadratic funding. It's been a lot of fun. And I think that one of the reasons why quadratic funding has kind of taken off a little bit with Gitcoin, but also with CLR Fund and what the work that Barry Whitehat has been doing with their CLR instance is that a $1 or a $10 contribution can be matched with $100 or $1,000 worth of matching. So give $1 and have $100 worth of impact is the reason why we've been able to get people off their bums and contributing to Gitcoin grants for 2 weeks every quarter. One of the coolest things I think with Gitcoin grants is the $69 million in results. I'm so happy that we hit the meme number exactly when DevCon happened, 69 million. But the data that comes out of this data set, there's 700,000 contributions to grants every quarter. This is a graph of the preference map, the economic graph of the preference map of the Ethereum community. I think in grants round 14, every node in this network is a grant or a user, and every edge is a transaction. So what we're doing is we're building a peer-to-peer mesh network of economic preferences and seeing which public goods in the community actually cares about. And from there, we can reason about how to expand funding for public goods. So public goods funding is a collective resource allocation problem. Quadratic funding creates collective intelligence that allows us to figure out which resources we should fund. Chicken, egg, egg, chicken. They're very combined with each other. But there is a hitch, and it is the Sybil attackers, and that's what the most of my presentation is going to be about. If I'm grant number 2 and I see grant number 1 is getting way more of the matching pool because they have more contributors, I can just make up more identities and give money to that second grant. So that is the Sybil attack problem. What happens when you can manufacture identities in a one human, one vote system? Well, your manufactured identities take everything over. So, if you put yourself in my shoes, this is what I picture every time. This is maybe my imposter syndrome, but whenever someone says, hey, Kevin, congrats on Gitcoin, I'm like, hey, well, Gitcoin's built on grants, which is built on top of quadratic funding, on top of Sybil resistance, which is an unsolved problem. Oh, fuck, Gitcoin's kind of a castle in the sky until Sybil resistance is solved. So I did not choose this problem to solve. It chose me, and that is why I'm here to educate you about Sybil resistance. That is the history of Gitcoin and Sybil resistance. I think that there's a big opportunity outside of Gitcoin if someone could build a Sybil resistance money Lego to move the whole ecosystem from one token, one vote type systems, which are inherently plutocratic and are dominated by capital, to one human, one vote systems, which are dominated by people. 99% of humanity, their financial lives is their jobs, and they don't have a ton of savings. If we build one human, one vote DAOs, or things that look like one human, one vote DAOs, we will build more utility for the mainstream of humanity to enter this space and not get clobbered by the whales. And it's about building that money Lego. If we can solve Sybil resistance, then we can have quadratic funding, we can have quadratic voting, we can measure the Gini coefficient of any of the economies that we build. We could build UBI, which would stream money to people. We could build one person, one vote DAOs. We could build data collectives. We could build more human-centric DAOs. We don't even know really what we could build with this money Lego yet. And so I'm really excited to hopefully be solving partially this problem with the work that we're doing at Gitcoin and enabling a punctuated equilibrium of more democratic DAOs out there. So Sybil resistance is an important problem to address, is the TLDR of this section of the talk. And now I want to characterize the infinite Sybil resistance game that we've seen at Gitcoin from here on out. All right, let's start off by meeting our adversaries. This is the fun part of the talk. Script kiddies. Anyone in the audience used to be a script kiddie? I did. A couple brave hands in the audience. This is how you start off when you're a hacker. You're downloading scripts, you're seeing what you can exploit, you're seeing what's available in the world. Not a lot of sophistication, but there are a lot of script kiddies out there. One level up from them is petty criminals. So basically think like script kiddies, but they're your run-of-the-mill criminals that are trying to find exploits. They can rob a house, or in this case, make up an identity and steal some quadratic matching. Rational economic actors are sort of one level out from this. If you demoralize the problem of civil resistance and identity and of cheating the commons, then you're basically just looking at rational economic actors that want to exploit the matching funds. Solana DeFi devs. There was a scandal a little while ago. This guy right here basically faked a bunch of usage on his platform by making up identities. So I think Solana is kind of cool, and I know the founders, and it's just fun to pick on them a little bit. Organized crime. So basically one level above the petty criminals that are unorganized are basically like mafia-style entities, really organized groups that maybe develop their own software, figure out their own exploits. They're probably sitting on a couple 0 days they've gotten off of the black market. And they're the more organized, sophisticated actors that you're going to deal with. And then up at the top end of the spectrum in sophistication is the nation-state level Sybil attackers that basically are maybe manufacturing IDs with their national identification system, or maybe they're just running a team of hackers that are falsifying DIDs on digital systems. So that's the run-of-the-mill of the adversaries that we're going to have to deal with. And I've got a couple different points of the Sybil resistance game as I've witnessed it through my time at Gitcoin over the last 15 months. And I want to talk about how hard of a problem this is to solve in a legitimate way as we go through the different criteria for solving this problem. So criteria 0, adversarial nature. This is a zero-sum game between the blue team, the people who are trying to defend the system, and the red team, which wants to get as much of the matching funds as they can. And so it's helpful to think about this in an adversarial nature in which over time, if there are funds available to a Sybil attacker and it's cheaper for them to get them than it is for them to expend resources to do it, then they're going to get the money. And that's how you have to design the system. So I've got a couple different memes of how you can think about the adversarial nature of the Sybil attackers trying to get the matching funds. There's a lot of history and media and entertainment of Sybil attackers and Sybil defenders, or red teams and blue teams trying to break into in various systems. And I think it's fun to think of Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner as being in an infinite game with each other, in which the Coyote's trying to catch the Roadrunner and the Roadrunner's trying to get away. And the infinite game is that they never ever really solve it, but they provide some entertainment along the way. On a more serious note, the diversity of adversaries from script kiddie up to nation state down to Solana DeFi devs means that you have a real plurality of sophistication levels of your adversaries that you have to deal with in the Sybil resistance context. So different levels of sophistication from script kiddies to nation states that are probably developing their own 0 days, different levels of motivation. And this is like, as someone who likes to think about things in a rational economic way, kind of hard for me because there are people out there that just want to fuck up Gitcoin for the lols. Like they just want to it's a quest for them and it's not a rational economic game for them. And there's a diversity of methods that can be used in this game. So basically, there's a bunch of different ways of providing Sybil resistance in the web. You can have a biometric system. You can have a KYC nation-state system. You can have presence-based systems. You can have web of trust-based systems. These are all ways of creating Sybil resistance And like what works against WorldCoin might not work against a Bright ID and vice versa. So there's a diversity of adversaries, and this complexifies the problem a whole lot. So you have to plan for a diversity of adversaries. Criteria number one, notice that I zero offset my criteria. It's because this talk is for the developers out there. Criteria number one is the need for privacy, centricity, and sovereignty in the data set. So basically, actually, before I get onto this, the thing that's fucked about Web 2 identity is that we don't have any fundamental respect for privacy and the sovereignty of our data when we log in with Google and we log in with Facebook. Those are centralized data monopolies that have a surveillance-based business model that is using our data to feed that surveillance-based business model. And so basically, with Gitcoin Passport, which is the mechanism for Sybil resistance that has been developed, you can kind of think of it as a three-state state machine. Any on-chain or off-chain data, from Google to Facebook to POAP to Bright ID to Proof of Humanity to your WorldCoin portfolio, can be ETL'd, which is just technology speak for transformed into a stamp using the verifiable credential W3C standard for storing the data. And it is stored, only non-PII is stored on Ceramic, a decentralized data store where you'll always have access to your data as long as you have access to your private key. And by the way, your data is in an open standard called the verifiable credentials. So if you decide that Gitcoin isn't a great quadratic funding protocol, then you can go and you can use it at anywhere else that accepts verifiable credentials, provided that they figured out how to connect with Gitcoin Passport. Sovereignty and privacy at the base layer of our data systems. And then basically what we do is boil down all these stamps into what's called a personhood score, which is basically the cost of forgery of an attack against that identity. So if you have a 10 PS personhood score, then you have a $10 cost of forgery. If you have a 10,000 personhood score, then you have a $10,000 cost of forgery. A $10,000 cost of forgery probably keeps the script kiddies and the Home Alone attackers out of the system, but it probably doesn't keep like North Korea out of your Sybil resistance system. And so by having that scalar of a personhood score, the likelihood of the cost of forgery, we are able to basically manage the diversity of adversaries by just creating an infinite game where all we have to do, instead of solving Sybil resistance and swallowing the whole elephant at once, we just push up the total personhood score of the system over time. So we go from swallowing an elephant to very granularly pushing up the personhood score of the system. And it's all done on a privacy-aware sovereign foundation. Okay, so now that we've established the foundation, how do we know that foundation is aligned to us? One of the big problems with, again, Facebook and Google and the way that we've traditionally stored our data is the need to avoid plutocracy. How do we know that Gitcoin's not going to turn against us one day? Well, I mean, the first layer against that is the consent of the governed. The idea that a government's legitimacy is only justified when it's consented to by its people. So government action only is legitimate when it has the consent of the governed. So and this is a big idea behind why Gitcoin, when it designed its token drop back in May of 2021, made it so that the community could delegate to the community, and the community is now in charge of governing Gitcoin. So Trent.eth, Austin Griffith, Linda Z, Left Harris are all the people who are the top stewards. I think some of them are probably at the DAOist now. And the idea is that the community is governing the tool that the community uses. The consent of the governed is the loop that we sort of design around with respect to plutocracy. And I think that that's there's a couple other reasons why we created the right to exit in Gitcoin that avoids plutocracy, and I'll get into those in the rest of the talk. The third criteria is collusion, and it basically goes like this. Hey, Hunt, you have a $100 personhood score on your Gitcoin passport. I'll give you $20 if I can take your passport for a spin. And then Hunt says, sold, bought and sold. And that is how you become that red dot in the sea of gray dots. And then what happens over time is as word spreads that you can monetize your Gitcoin passport, more people turn into the adversarial game. And then they tell their friends, and all of a sudden you have the red team has taken over the game. So we want to avoid that. It would suffice to say, and collusion is one layer above the Sybil resistance problem. If you solve the problem of how to give out legitimate identities, the problem of who is colluding with who is not something that is solved when you solve Sybil resistance, but it is something that you have a solid foundation for when you can at least track the different identities and their personhood scores in the system. And from there, you can start thinking about how do we build in a systemic defensibility that gives the blue team a fundamental advantage over the red team in this infinite adversarial game. When I hear Vitalik talk about proof of stake and basically how much harder it is to attack proof of stake than it is to defend proof of stake, then I think about how do we make Gitcoin grants systemically defensible such that when the red team attacks it, they have to put a lot of capital at stake in order to do it. But in order to defend it, it's actually pretty cheap and easy with the data trails that happen. And that's the proof of stake inspired way of explaining systemic defensibility. So basically, if someone goes in and tries to sell their identity or tries to make up an identity, then basically there's a team of blue team sentries, and those can be either people that are working for the protocol or the protocol itself that basically just figures out they're a Sybil attacker and says, what do they say? Lol, no. You're not going to Sybil attack this system. Nice try. And then eventually the red team says, oh, it doesn't seem to be worth my time. I'm going to move on and go hack Solana or something like that. I'm only picking on Solana because it's cheap laughs with you guys. I actually think it's cool. All right, so this is the Sybil resistance battleground. Quake has Team Fortress. Home Alone has the McAllister's house. Gitcoin has the Gitcoin grants system where end users get Quadratic funding on top of their grants, and they can get to $25,000 worth of matching as of grants round 1 in January of 2019. That was 3 years ago. We have evolved quite a bit since then. So basically, the whole system is overseen by governance. There is now $3 million worth of matching instead of $25K. The end users have to go through grant approvals in a way that is managed by the DAO. And basically, we not only have to worry about Sybil attacks of the end users, but also Sybil attacks of grants, where people are making up different identities for the grants. We've got Gitcoin Passport, which is a sovereignty-aware, privacy-preserving, forkable open source protocol for doing identity. We're using something called Pairwise, which is another beautiful idea from Vitalik in order to manage collusion. And then you can get to grants and you can get access to the $3 million in matching. Everything here is a proactive Sybil resistance mechanism that's built into the system. And then we've got a team of sentries, of data teams that are going in and are analyzing the data, non-PII data, and figuring out where the Sybil attackers are getting the data from the system. So basically, the battleground has evolved. And the TLDR of this is we must find a systemically defensible way to route out Sybil attacks below a certain amount of matching score. So the Sybil resistance that Gitcoin needed when it was giving out 25K in matching is less than the amount that it's giving out when it has $3 million in matching, which is less than when we have $420 million in matching, hopefully in a few years. So that's systemic defensibility of the battleground. I also think that anyone who's going to be housing the identity of users needs to be modular. So basically it does one thing and it does it well, and it needs to be forkable. So if it's not doing that thing well, then anyone can fork it out. And I think it needs to be decentralized, which means that it's in the hands of the users that it serves. So basically what we've done with Gitcoin Passport is, remember this 3-stage ETL process? Any on-chain or off-chain data can be turned into a stamp, which then becomes part of your personhood score. Well, anyone can go in and fork it and can add their own stamp to Gitcoin Passport. So you kind of think of this as like, if there's a new attack vector that has been opened up, then adding a new stamp is a new way of foiling a Sybil attacker that is using that vector. This is a tool that the blue team can use in order to figure out how they route out the Sybil attackers in the system. The other thing that's really cool about this is that Passport can inhale any identity information and turn it into a sovereignty, privacy-aware, modular credential. Twitter, Proof of Humanity, WorldCoin, POAP, they can all be inhaled into Gitcoin Passport. And this is, over time, I think how the blue team has a systemic defense against Sybil resistance is that if a new attack vector opens up, then all it takes is inhaling another stamp and absorbing its powers in order to ward that down. Further down the stream, you can add your own scoring algorithm. Say you think Gitcoin's captured by I don't know, someone who has a bad idea. You can add your own scoring algorithm. So you don't agree with Gitcoin's personhood score, you could fork it and you could create a personhood score for your own app. And then you can also add personhood score to your own DApp. So if there's anyone else in the ecosystem that wants to, like, I have a lot of people who are like, hey, Kevin, we're getting Sybil attacked. What do we do? And I was like, oh, like, how much time do you have? There's a ton for you to learn when you're doing this. Like, no, we can make Gitcoin Passport into a money Lego that anyone can get personhood score with like a couple lines of code inside of their DApp. And that's what I'm really excited about. And I think that the last sort of linchpin to build into this is building in more network effects into the way Gitcoin Passport works. So basically, network effects are basically the idea that a network gets more valuable the more people use it. The more people that are on Twitter, the more I want to go to Twitter, which means more people are on Twitter, and the more I want to go to Twitter. That's what a network effect is. So our network effect at Gitcoin Passport is that the more dApps consume Gitcoin Passport data, the more reason there is for users to create Gitcoin Passport identities, which means that there's more stamps that are issued, which means that more people will fork in and create more stamps on Passport, which means that more dApps are like you can see where this is going. More chickens create more eggs, creates more chickens, creates more eggs. And what you want to do is you want to spin up that flywheel, because if there's a perfectly legitimate academic way of preventing Sybil resistance and no one ever uses it, does it make a sound? Maybe mixing my metaphors there, but that just is a way of saying that because there's actually users and data on Gitcoin Passport, there's a reason that you're going to want to use it. All right, and so I think that like the biggest sort of thing that you have to realize when you're solving this is that this is an infinite evolutionary game that will probably never be solved. So Gitcoin DAO as an institution has decided to take this on for the rest of the space and to manage the evolutionary nature of this game. And I'm going to go back to Home Alone in order to explain what I mean. I was born, I'm 38 now, I'm an elder millennial. Has everyone in the audience seen Home Alone? Okay, Kevin, yeah, there's a Kevin meme in there somewhere. Okay, so basically these guys on the right are trying to attack the McAllister house and steal their presents for the holidays. And Kevin McAllister sets up a bunch of traps inside of the house in order to foil them as they're coming into the house. From an icy step to micro machines in the foyer. Hopefully I'm taking you back to your childhood here. We'll do one more of these because this one's my favorite one, is the attackers getting hit with a paint can as they try to come up with the stairs. So there is a game here in which the attackers are trying to get in and get the presents, and Kevin McAllister is trying to keep them in there. And the game evolves from Home Alone 1 to Home Alone 2. You can see where this is going. Home Alone 3. Bet you guys didn't even know there was a Home Alone 4 and a Home Alone 5. I certainly didn't until I made this presentation. Every time this happens, the attackers evolve from game to game, and we're eventually approaching, I think, the YouTube face covers for the covers of Home Alone 6. And also, who knows what Macaulay Culkin's doing these days. But the point is that an iterative evolutionary game where the attackers learn every quarter and so do the good guys every quarter. And the whole idea is to realize that this iterative evolutionary game will probably never be solved unless we find a way to really build in systemic defensibility into the thing. But, oh wait, there's a Home Alone 7. I didn't even make that part of my, so anyway, basically this system is the battleground in which we get the data. Like, everyone thinks that Gitcoin Grants is a crowdfunding platform, but if you turn it on its side, it's actually a resource allocation system. And there's attackers that are attacking the blue team data defense systems every quarter. And so if you look at it on its side, there's actually this iterative evolutionary game where the attackers are trying to get the capital. And it has these feedback loops in it where we've built proactive mechanisms to build to defend the system. And there's also daily feedback where people are reviewing reports within the DAO. And then there's quarterly feedback where the whole thing gets evolved forward. And by the way, this is not an easy thing to do in a way that is all governed via DAO governance. And so you not only have to evolve it over time in a way that stays ahead of the attackers, but it has to stay legitimate, as in governed by the community the whole way. So that's the Sybil resistance problem. I feel like I have a lot off my chest because Gitcoin Grants has like fallen ass backwards into this awesome algorithm with this one Achilles heel, and the Achilles heel is Sybil resistance. And now I've told you all about it. So it's like a burden shared is less of a burden. So basically, Gitcoin has developed Gitcoin Passport, which is a Sybil resistant money Lego. And I think that if you play it forward a little bit to what the future of Gitcoin Grants is, hopefully it's a system that is privacy and sovereignty preserving, that avoids plutocracy, that avoids collusion. I want my $20 back, Hunt. It's systemically defensible. It's got network effects built into it. It's modular and forkable. It's decentralized, and it's embraced the evolutionary nature of the game. This is why when another founder reaches out to me and they're like, we're being Sybil attacked, I'm like, oh, how much time do you have? There's a lot to solve with this problem. So basically, what we've done is we've developed a thing called Gitcoin Passport, which is a money Lego for Sybil resistance. You can get it at passport.gitcoin.co. You can connect it and get some stamps. Or if you think that Passport sucks, you can go and fork it. And if you want to integrate it into your app, it only takes, I put one line in the code to like be splashy, but it's really like 10 lines of code to put it into your DApp. But the whole point is now that the ecosystem can kind of follow what Gitcoin's doing on Sybil resistance, and hopefully we enable more one human, one vote, quadratic vote, democratic vote, UBI type systems. And hopefully when there's more democratic systems in the ecosystem, then that brings in people who aren't rich into the ecosystem. Everyday citizens can now get utility out of Web3. And that is the idea behind Passport. You can check out the API at docs.passport.gitcoin.co. Thank you for listening to me talk about this really hard technical problem, and I hope to see more Sybil resistance out there. So thanks again for listening.